Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today we're going to be talking about 5 eyeshadow palettes that really surprised me. So before we get into it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel before you leave. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and let's get into it. Alright, so I've said about a couple of palettes recently that I really wasn't expecting to love them as much as I do, and I really thought that they weren't going to work out for me for one reason or another, but I wanted to review them. And then I got thinking about different palettes in my collection that had a similar effect for one reason or another. So that's what we're talking about today. So we have a mix of newer and a couple of older palettes. We do only have 5, but the first one I want to talk about is from Oma by Sharon C. This one I've talked about before, and this one was really big for me last year because this was $5 at Walmart, and this is the Dreaming Quad. She does have 2 others. I do have them, I just haven't tried them because the color stories aren't as cohesive. This is a very beautiful, boring, neutral palette, but this reminds me a lot of the Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk Dreams Quad. And what I love about this so much is that the shimmer shades in this palette are so glittery. They're absolutely stunning. And I am not normally a huge drugstore eyeshadow fan. I am definitely very picky when it comes to eyeshadow formulas, and I feel like that is one area where I don't feel like the drugstore has necessarily figured it out yet. I think ColourPop is one of my favorite affordable formulas. The Milani matte palette that I've been loving so much, that is one of my favorite formulas, but this is also so good. I never hear anybody talk about this. I think it ranked very high for me in my year-end rankings last year, and I've continued to reach for it over my Charlotte Tilbury Quad. So for $5, this is more sparkly and just as blendable. It works just as well. I do think the mattes are a little bit more pigmented than the Charlotte Tilbury. The Charlotte Tilbury leans a little bit more on the buildable side, whereas this definitely more pigmented, but so beautiful, easy to work with, so sparkly, shiny. I just love the way this looks on the eyes. And again, this one really surprised me because, again, I'm not a huge drugstore eyeshadow fan. So for this to be as good as it is, I am so shocked I don't hear more people talk about these. Okay, the next palette I want to talk about is one that was a fall release for this year, and this is the ABH Fall Romance palette. So this one is definitely darker, a little bit on the grungy side, and I thought initially that I would not love this because it's just going to be too deep. It's not going to work out for me, and I was very wrong. The formulas in here are phenomenal. I love that we have these greens. I just love green shadows. We have purples, which I also love. We have a couple of browns. This Fireside shade is absolutely stunning as well. And this is another palette that, yes, it is deeper, so it is one that I'm going to reach for when I'm looking for a little bit more of a pigmented, more impactful look, but you can just be very light-handed with these mattes and make it work. The formula is so good. The shimmers are absolutely stunning. And I was really surprised that I was able to make this work on my very fair skin, but I can, and I'm so happy about it. I do have a full review of this one with, I think, several different looks. I love this palette. I think it's so pretty. It's definitely still not my most reach for palette just because it is very deep. I'm always pleasantly surprised when I reach for this, how well I can make it work for me. So definitely very impressed by this. So the first palette in this video was talking about an affordable formula that I think is really good. And next is a palette from an affordable brand that has really impressed me over the last year. And this is from Alter Ego. This is their Mirage palette. So if you're not familiar with Alter Ego, they are a very affordable brand, but they do tend to create palettes that are supposed to be alternatives to high-end palettes. So I believe this retails for around $24, and this is supposed to be an alternative for the Huda Beauty Empowered palette. And that is a palette that came out last year, and normally I like to review Huda's larger palettes, but I skipped on that one because I just thought it was going to be too much for me, to be honest. But since that time, there have been a couple times when I've seen the palette and I thought maybe I should just try it. I've heard people raving about it. And then Alter Ego very kindly sent this over to me, and I love this. So the color story is surprisingly easy to work with. Again, if you cover up this half of the palette, you get a very wearable color story on the bottom. Or if you cover up this end, you get some very deep grungy looks. So if you split it up that way, it's a lot more approachable. I do love the way Alter Ego tends to rearrange the shades. So they might be creating the alternative, but they will also rearrange the shades to make them make more sense. And that's one of my absolute favorite things that they do. So you do get 2 creams in here, and then you get like a balm shimmer, which I did not think I would like, but I actually do. It's actually very, very pretty. The metallics in here are absolutely stunning. And again, this is another one, just like the Fall Romance, where I thought it's going to be way too deep, but it's actually not. It is so much more wearable than I thought. I was very wrong about this one. I love the looks I've created with this one. I do believe I have a 3 looks, 1 palette with this one up as well. And I was so happy with everything I created. The formula in here is so, so good. If you blindfolded me, I would not be able to tell you that this is not a high-end palette. I would have no idea. So I actually ended up really, really loving this one. And that actually brings me to the next palette that really shocked me this year. This is from Huda, and this is the Pretty Grunge palette. So this is this year's holiday release. And this is another one, looking at it, it looks so deep and grungy, and I am never going to be able to make this work. But this is another one. If you cover up this half, it looks very wearable. This little quad of 6 here, super wearable, super everyday. And then you cover up this side and then you get those grungy looks. Again, so much easier if you break it up that way, less intimidating. The formula in here is, again, just so incredibly good. She does have some different textures. The shape Rebel is so interesting. So I feel like it looks different every single time you swatch it. If you pair it, it can look really purpley, it can look kind of green. It is a very foiled formula, so I do find that if you don't want all that added texture, you might want to warm it up between your fingers before applying it to the eyes. But it just looks so beautiful when you blend it out. It ends up looking a little more silver. I've paired it with the pink mattes in this palette and had it look a little bit more pinky. It's just such an interesting shade. The shade Haphazard is actually just like a purple metallic. There's really nothing special about that shade. Strong AF is so interesting because it is a purpley silver shift. It's fascinating. Stand Up is almost like a cream metallic. It's so beautiful. Everything about this palette I just love. I love that I can do a brown look. I love that I can create something a little more pink or purple. I just always love how it turns out, and I really love the shades in here. The only thing I don't love is the shade Grunge, which is a black eye gloss, which just seems really unnecessary to me. I'm never going to use that, but the rest of the palette is so good that it honestly makes up for it. And again, this surprised me in the very best way. I absolutely thought I was just picking it up because I wanted to review it and I wanted to build on my Huda Beauty collection, but honestly, this is one of my very favorite palettes right now. I love it so much. I had to make myself use something else today. I've been loving this. Truly. And lastly is a palette I've talked about so many times, and I keep promising that I will have a multiple looks with this palette, and I will. I just need a minute to do it. So this is the ABH Norvina Volume 5 palette. So this palette I really do love, and I think I picked it up for Black Friday 2 years ago. And something about this just kept calling to me, and I couldn't figure out what it was. When it first came out, I thought there's a lot of redundancy in there. It's a lot of purple. I'm probably never going to reach for it. But then it just kept nagging at me. Every single time I would be on their website or I'd be on Sephora, this just kept calling to me, and I love this palette. This palette makes me feel so creative and inspired. I can create some very purpley looks, but I can also get some very wearable looks out of this, and that's part of why I want to do a multiple looks with this palette. It's definitely coming. I would assume it's going to come more January, February though. I just need the time. But I do absolutely love this palette. I think it's so phenomenal. I always love the looks I create with it. The shades are actually so easy to work with, easy to blend. The shimmers are just gorgeous. This is definitely one of my favorite palettes of all time, and in my entire collection. I truly, truly love this one, and I cannot wait to just sit down and create specifically with this palette. Those are 5 palettes that I picked up, or one of which was sent to me, The other 4 I purchased, and I did not expect to like them either because they were too deep and grungy, or they were an affordable formula, or something about the color story, but for some reason I was compelled to pick them up, and I'm so glad I did. So that is it for me today. Let me know down below if there's any palettes that surprised you. Are there any in my ranking that surprised you that they were here? Let me know. I love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload at least 3 new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!